Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 735, and today is December 30th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Another holiday week here, so the schedule will probably be a little bit different. I'm planning on doing episodes of Conflicts of Interest Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday and Friday, which means Wednesday, New Year's Day, is likely going to be an episode of the Kyle Anzalone show that I'm going to republish, at least in the podcast feed for Conflicts of Interest. I might also throw it up on the YouTube channel. For anybody who hasn't yet, please go on over and subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone show. That is going to be a major project of mine in 2025, and I think it really has a chance of getting big. So head on over, be one of the first few hundred subscribers, and help me get that channel going so we can have a big takeoff after the new year. All right, everyone, let's get into the news today. First up, this article I wrote for the Institute on December 29th. White House tells Ukraine to pull its demoralized forces from Russia. So the Joe Biden administration believes that Ukrainian forces are on the verge of a total loss in Russia's Kursk Oblast and is now advising Kiev to pull its troops back. Reporting on Kiev's losses in Kursk, the AP reports that the Ukrainian forces have become demoralized. So in August, tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops stormed across the Russian border and seized a large swath of lightly defended territory in the Kursk Oblast. Since then, Moscow has won back over half the territory. Now the White House says Ukraine must abandon its foothold in Russia before its troops become encircled. So discussing the situation facing Ukrainians in Kursk, one official told Bloomberg it was a question of time whether Russian forces could envelop it, creating a dilemma for Ukrainian forces to either retreat or surrender. Two officials confirmed to the outlet that the White House believes that the Kremlin is now pushing more and putting more resources into the Kursk battlefield, and Ukrainian forces will be defeated within months. The assessment has the White House telling Kiev to pull its remaining forces out of Russia before they are either defeated, killed, or trapped. So the strategy behind the Kursk offensive was always in question. Many of the proponents of the attack argued it would give Kiev additional bargaining chips at the negotiating table. However, it now appears that Ukraine will lose the territory before talks begin, and they also lost some of their most effective and best trained and equipped forces during that operation. So additionally, the loss in Kursk has caused Ukrainian troops to become demoralized. The Associated Press reports, quote, 5 months after their shock offensive into Russia, Ukrainian troops are now bloodied and demoralized by the rising risk of defeat in Kursk, a region some want to hold on at all costs while others question the value of having gone in at all. In a sign that the Russian envelopment may be coming soon, some Ukrainian commanders told the outlet that they were unable to even evacuate the bodies of their dead soldiers. American and Ukrainian officials have claimed that many of the Russian gains in Kursk are the result of the deployment of North Korean soldiers to the battlefield. While there is no evidence of a significant North Korean involvement in the fighting, the White House has promoted the allegations and used it as an excuse to ramp up support for Kiev, including that was at least a part of, if not the major part, of the White House deciding that Ukraine could use long-range American missiles to strike targets deep inside Russia. And according to the Bloomberg article, not sure how true that is, they say that that's what allowed the Ukrainians to hold Kursk for as long as they have, was that change of status, or else the Russians would have overran the Ukrainian forces prior to this. So on Friday, White House spokesperson John Kirby claimed that North Korean soldiers were launching ineffective attacks in Kursk and sustained heavy losses. He said, "We now assess that North Korean forces are conducting mass dismounted assaults against Ukrainian positions in Kursk, and these human wave attacks haven't really been all that effective. In fact, we've assessed that they've resulted in heavy casualties for these North Korean forces." And this sounds like propaganda, right? This idea that, and Kirby even says this, that these North Korean soldiers are just highly highly indoctrinated, right? That they just, are on some kind of moral crusade, and they think what they're doing is what they have to do. And so they are willing to give their lives, even in attacks that are completely lunacy and completely ludicrous, like charging, entrenched Ukrainian positions with infantry forces on the ground. And that the North Koreans are sustaining high losses. And in fact, North Korean soldiers are even killing themselves and defecting to Ukraine to avoid being killed on the battlefield. Again, there's no evidence for really backing up for what Kirby claimed. As I said initially, when these reports first surfaced, I had seen the relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang develop, particularly after Biden decided that he was going to shut the Kremlin out from the rest of the world. Putin went and made a deal with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. They signed a mutual defense pact. So the idea that North Korean soldiers were in Russia, it's certainly possible. Now, that the idea that they're waging these full frontal assaults and they're taking massive losses, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What would make more sense is that they were there, in the command centers with the Russian soldiers, learning strategy, learning how to fight against NATO forces. If they are there and they are helping the Russian forces use some of the equipment that the North Koreans are giving the Russians, or learning how to use some of the Russian equipment that North Korea plans to buy, that also made sense on both sides. This idea, again, of just North Korean soldiers going and dying in massive numbers in Russia, what would be the point of that? You always have to ask yourself that when you hear this Western propaganda. And so they're blowing this out of proportion in order to give themselves an excuse to give more military equipment to Kiev. All right, next up here, this one from our pal Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. Report U.S. THAAD missile system used in Israel for first time to intercept Houthi missile. So an American thermal high altitude aerial defense THAAD battery that President Biden deployed to Israel earlier this year was used Friday for the first time in an attempt to intercept a missile fired by Yemen's Houthis, Reuters reported. The attack came after Israel bombed the Sana'a International Airport in Yemen, almost killing the head of the World Health Organization, and the Houthis say they launched the missile at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport in response. The Israeli military said the Houthi missile was intercepted by Israeli air defenses, but it is unclear that if the THAAD actually downed the missile. Reuters reported an analysis of the THAAD missile launch would determine its success. The U.S. sent the THAAD battery and about 100 troops to operate it to Israel in October to back an Israeli attack on Iran. About a week after that, the THAAD became operational and Israel launched airstrikes in Iran. In recent weeks, the Houthis have stepped up their operations against Israel, and some missiles have gotten past Israeli air defenses. The U.S. and Israel have stepped up their attacks on Yemen, which has done nothing but to escalate the situation, as the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, are vowing they won't back down. And so far, it seems that the Houthis have only increased and actually bolstered the regional position with these attacks, rather than it in any way degrading their capabilities. Still, a significant amount of ships can't cross the Red Sea. The U.S. has engaged in its most significant naval operations against the Houthis since World War II in the Red Sea, and it hasn't created a major difference. So it does seem that there is some trouble there for the it will be interesting when we find out if the THAAD was able to successfully shoot down this Houthi missile, or if it was an Israeli interceptor and the THAAD missed. All right, next up here, I want to go through my Libertarian Institute debrief for December 29th. That's the daily Libertarian Institute email. Of course, we talk about all the stuff posted on the Institute in the email, but I start off by writing a little kind of short op-ed to blog post style thing. So today's is titled, U.S. Supports War on Hospitals. Over the past week, Israel has ramped up its attacks on hospitals in Gaza. Of course, no number of drones dropped on doctors will stop the U.S. from flooding Israel with our weapons. The latest attack came on the Al-Wafa hospital in Gaza City. Haaretz reports the Israeli military killed 7 people in a missile attack on the hospital in the eastern part of Gaza City, Palestinian civil defense said on Sunday. So the director of the health ministry said the Al Wafa hospital is partially operational, providing care to patients with physical disabilities. The hospital had been rehabilitated and was getting ready to receive patients. Had it not been targeted by Israeli shelling today, it would have been ready to fully reopen in the next few days. And so what they're talking about here is they have this hospital that had already been destroyed, raided by the Israeli forces. And what I guess they were doing is probably taking patients from other hospitals, maybe patients who have been evacuated from hospitals in northern Gaza, patients from other hospitals around Gaza City that, maybe they need their wounds changed every day. They need their burns, cared for and things like that. But they're not in active need of surgery or in an immediate crisis. And so they don't need an operating theater. And so they have been moving them to the Al Wafa hospital. And then as soon as this hospital gets ready to start operating at its full potential, meaning that they could do these operations and really take care of people, then Israel bombs it again. It seems very clear that Israel's goal here is to knock Gaza's hospitals out of operations. So that attack followed the raid and the burning of the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. Haaretz reports Israeli forces raided the Kamal Adwan hospital, one of only 3 medical facilities on the northern edge of the Gaza Strip, on Friday, ordering dozens of patients and hundreds of others to evacuate the compound, officially said. Dr. Hassam Abu Shaifi, director of the hospital, said now the occupation army is burning all the operating departments in the hospital while we are still here. The army evacuated the entire medical staff and the displaced people and arrested a number of the medical staff. There are large numbers of injuries among the medical staff, and he himself was actually arrested by the IDF. Last week, Israel murdered 5 Palestinian healthcare workers in Gaza and 5 journalists at the Al-Adwa hospital in Nusra. The destruction of the hospital should be a clear sign that it's time to cut off the flow of weapons to Israel, but mindless Joe Biden and his aides will not take that step. And again, this is just so obvious that what is going on in Gaza is meant to be a genocide. Why else would you attack hospitals, destroy hospitals, set fire to hospitals? But this is what Israel's doing, and on a weekly basis. It's not that this is something new that's only happened in the past few days and the White House is just figuring out how they're going to react to it. It's happened time and time again. Hospital after hospital shut down, destroyed, absolutely wrecked by the Israeli forces, tanks firing on them. And yet it doesn't deter at all the Biden administration from supporting Tel Aviv. All right, so next up here, Israeli strikes on Gaza Strip kill at least 30 more Palestinians. Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip have killed 30 Palestinians since dawn on Sunday, medical sources told Al Jazeera. One of the strikes targeted the upper floor of the Al Wafa hospital that we already covered. In central Gaza, Israeli forces shelled an area to the northwest of the Nusra refugee camp. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, at least 9 were killed and 15 were wounded, and women and children were among the casualties. In northern Gaza, at least 7 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli strike on a house. Israel also offered new evacuation orders in the city of Bet Hanun, which has been under total siege since early October, and that is a part of the ethnic cleansing campaign. There's 3 major cities in northern Gaza, and they are all being destroyed, building by building, detonated. I mean, I can't even imagine going one day back to somewhere that you had lived or, seen it as you exited, and just every single house, every single structure, the stores, the bakeries, the libraries, the universities, the schools, everything, the mosques, it's all gone. It's all been first blown up by bombs and then detonation and then run over by a bulldozer, and likely the bodies of many of the former inhabitants are just lost in the rubble, probably forever. So the violence on Sunday came 2 days after Israeli forces raided the Kamal Adwan hospital, and arrested the doctor, who I believe is still in custody, and there is still some concern about his well-being. All right, next up, let's move to Lebanon, where Israeli forces, in spite of a ceasefire, are pushing their offensive into southern Lebanon. So Israeli forces advanced deeper into southern Lebanon and burned homes. This from Jason Ditz, antiwar.com. Sunday marked 33 days into the 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. So far, Israel has committed at least 329 violations, that's about 10 a day, and officials are more and more open, saying they probably won't withdraw from Lebanon in 60 days, as they were meant to under the deal. The violations include airstrikes and gunfire in several areas across southern Lebanon, but in the Maradon district, it seems to be the most serious focus in recent days, where Israeli troops have invaded multiple towns and have begun burning civilian homes. Israel started the new offensive last week, invading areas deeper into Lebanon that they managed to occupy during the war. They hit the Walder al-Hajar first and were expelling civilian population with heavy machine gun fire, and it is just west of the towns that were attacked this weekend, and is pushing the Israelis closer to the Litani River. And as we had talked about on this show, the plans for Greater Israel call for Tel Aviv to control the Middle Eastern region south of the Litani River. And so seems to be what they're doing, creating Greater Israel and taking more Lebanese territory. The peacekeepers from the UN mission UNIFIL were told before the new offensive that they should keep patrols away from the areas that Israel is attacking for the safety of the UNIFIL peacekeepers. Israel has attacked UNIFIL sites and personnel multiple times during the war and has consistently warned them away from their operations. This seems to be the first time that they're actively warning UNIFIL about their operations after the ceasefire. Since the ceasefire, Israel has killed at least 33 people and wounded 37 others, mostly in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has largely either not retaliated over the attacks, or they fired, I think, 2 rockets into Israel that intentionally hit nowhere, just as a sign that, they were unhappy with the Israeli ceasefire violations. But Israel still accuses Hezbollah of conducting most of the ceasefire violations. Those violations on the Lebanese side are largely civilians attempting to return to parts of Lebanon that Israel is occupying militarily. And so Israel says that any car driving around southern Lebanon is a violation of the ceasefire. And so they're blowing up the cars and then claiming that gives them permission to attack deeper into Lebanon. Simply ridiculous. And as the Americans are the guarantors of the Israeli side of that agreement, all of this hurts American credibility in the world. All right, next up here, Syria's de facto leader says it will take 4 years to hold elections. So Syria's de facto leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, who is now going by, just like he rebranded his group HTS, he is rebranding himself Ahmed al-Shara, said in an interview published on Sunday that it may take up to 4 years to hold elections and 3 years to draft a new constitution. Jolani, the former leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, told Al Arabiya, the process of writing the Constitution may take up to 3 years, and we look forward to the Constitution that lasts for the longest possible period, and this is a difficult and lengthy task. Organizing elections may take up to 4 years. Any valid elections will require a comprehensive population census. Jolani and his group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, which is an offshoot of al-Qaeda, took over Syria after former President Bashar al-Assad fled in December. Jolani has appointed HTS officials to senior positions in the transition government, including Anas Hassan Kateb, a former al-Qaeda commander who was named Syria's intelligence chief. In the interview with Al Arabiya, Jolani addressed the criticism of forming a new government made up of HTS members and rejected the idea of sharing power with other factions. He said the current appointments were essential for a period and not intended to exclude anyone. Of course, this is obviously ridiculous because all of them are, Sunni jihadist types. Jolani said HTS was in talks with the US-backed Kurdish-led SDF with the ultimate goal of absorbing the force back into the Syrian military. He said negotiations are ongoing with the SDF to resolve the crisis in northeastern Syria. The U.S. celebrated the HTS takeover of Syria and has been friendly to Jilani since his let's see. Sorry, here I lost my place. The U.S. has celebrated the HTS takeover of Syria and has been friendly with Jilani despite his Al-Qaeda history. Earlier this month, Barbara Leaf, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, said she had a good and productive meeting with Jilani. That's the article I wrote and we discussed last week, and announced the U.S. is removing the $10 million bounty from Jilani's head. They've also talked about removing the sanctions from HTS and Syria. Now that Assad's out of power, they're willing to welcome the now Al-Qaeda-led Syria back into the world order. I guess Assad was just that awful that, even ISIS, Al-Qaeda is preferable to him, according to the White House. All right, another one from Jason Ditz here. Israel killed 17 mostly civilians in Damascus drone strike. So since the recent regime change in Syria, Israel has been carrying out more and more airstrikes against targets across the nation. The latest was today in Arda, a town near Metro Damascus, where Israeli drone killed at least 17 people, mostly civilians. Details are still emerging over the latest attack. Israel has not commented on it at all, which is not uncommon, but the Syrian Observatories for Human Rights said they believe the attack was targeting a weapons depot in the area. Israel has made one of its priorities since the ouster of Assad government, attacking Syria's military infrastructure. Israeli ground forces have also invaded additional territory in Syria and have captured territory. They're about 10, 15, maybe 25 kilometers from Damascus. Exactly where Israel is going to land on Syria is unclear, though they have cheered the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad and quickly made contact with the new Islamist government. The repeated airstrikes and concern about Turkey's influence suggest that they aren't looking at Syria suddenly as a friendly neighbor. The Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar over the weekend condemned the new Syrian Islamists as lacking legitimacy, saying that as far as Israel is concerned, they're a gang, not a legitimate government, and attacked them for their extremist ideologies. And so it'll be interesting to see if Washington suddenly starts to care that there's jihadists in Damascus now that Tel Aviv is complaining about it. All right, everyone. Wrapping up here today with one on Somalia. U.S. launches airstrikes in Somalia, claims 2 al-Shabaab fighters killed. U.S. Africa Command said in a press release on Thursday that its forces launched an airstrike in Somalia on December 24th. AFRICOM claimed that according to its initial assessment of the strike, 2 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and no civilians were harmed. Though the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties in Somalia, even worse, no matter who they kill, they always claim it's a militant, unless a Western journalist happens to go and talk to people in the area, and then they often find out that there were at least civilians killed, and oftentimes only civilians killed. The commander said the strike was launched 10 kilometers southwest of the town of Quino Baro, which is in the southern Juba region. The bombing comes after a lull in U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. The U.S. claimed the latest U.S. strike claimed by AFRICOM in Somalia occurred on July 15th, although it's possible that other U.S. attacks have been launched and haven't been made public. Particularly CIA attacks in Somalia are not always discussed. So the U.S. strikes comes just a few weeks after Jubaland, the southern federal member state of Somalia, which includes Middle Juba region, suspended relations with the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government. The move came after the federal government rejected Jubaland's election results. And so, this is a result of kind of the long-term U.S. policy in Somalia that's really no longer a country, and you have several regions of it trying to break off. So tensions over the election led to clashes between federal troops and local Jubaland forces. On Monday, clashes broke out again in the Dulau, which is on the border with Ethiopia, and Ethiopian troops reportedly intervened on the side of the local Jubaland forces. Al-Shabaab is expected to exploit the destabilization in Jubaland. The U.S. military claims that Al-Shabaab is a threat to the U.S. due to its size and the Al-Qaeda affiliation, but it's widely believed the group does not hold ambitions outside of Somalia. And so here you have Al-Jalani in Syria, who is a veteran of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and a real, bin Ladenite site jihadist that we should be concerned about. And we have no concern about him. We're actually lifting bounties on their head. At the same time, you have Al-Shabaab in Somalia, who has never shown any real ambition of carrying out attacks, certainly not outside of the Horn of Africa, but not outside of Somalia, really, maybe into Kenya, where U.S. forces who attacked Somalia are based, but that's it. And here you have the U.S. carrying out drone strikes against them. So, it's interesting the difference here of how our preferred jihadists are treated versus how jihadists in a country where the U.S. wants to continue to intervene and undermine the situation are targeted with airstrikes. All right, everybody, that will do it on today's show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more later in the week.